Welcome back. I'm going to continue reading Hinds Feet on High Places by Hannah Hernard. We are on chapter 11, In the Forest of Danger and Tribulation. It's a pretty long chapter, so I planning on not going on and on at the end of it because it is a long chapter, but just kind of the most important thing is what's in the contents of the book, and it's so good. So here we go. With what joy they had welcomed the shepherd as he sat down in their midst, and after cheerfully congratulating them on having surmounted the precipice, he laid his hands gently on the wounds of Much Afraid had received when she fell, and immediately they were healed. Then he began to speak to them about the way which lay ahead. You have now to go through the forest which clothe the sides of these mountains almost up to the snow line. The way will be steep, but you will come to a resting place here and there. These are the forests of danger and tribulation, and often the pine trees grow so tall and so closely together that the path may seem quite dark. Storms are very frequent up here on these slopes, but keep pressing forward, for remember that nothing can do you any real harm while you are following the path of my will. It did seem strange that even after safely surmounting so many difficulties, I'm gonna have to put my glasses on. I had taken them off because the glare was so bad, but I can't read without them. Okay. It did seem strange that even after safely surmounting so many difficulties and steep places, including the impassable precipice, just below them, Much Afraid should remain so like her name. But so it was. No sooner did the shepherd pronounce the words danger and tribulation than she began to shake and tremble all over again. The forest of danger and tribulation, she repeated with a piteous quiver in her voice. Oh, shepherd, wherever will you lead me next? To the next stage on the way to the high places, he answered, promptly smiling at her as nicely as possible. I wonder if you will ever be able to get me there, she groaned. Foolish little Much Afraid. I wonder you continue to bother with me and don't give up on the job altogether. It looks as though I shall never have anything but lame feet, and that even you won't be able to make them like Hinds' feet. She looked at her feet as she spoke. Certainly at the moment they did not look even more crooked than ever. I am not a man that I should lie, said the shepherd gravely. Look at me, Much Afraid. Do you believe that I will deceive you? Have I said, and shall I not do it? Or have I spoken, and I shall not make it good? Much Afraid trembled a little, partly at the tone of his voice, and partly because she was still much afraid by nature, and was already trying to picture what the forest of danger and tribulation would be like. That always had a disastrous effect upon her, but she answered patiently, No, I know that you are not a man that you would lie. I know that you will make good on what you have said. Then, said the shepherd, speaking more gently, I am going to lead you through danger and tribulation, Much Afraid, but you need not be the least bit afraid, for I shall be with you. Even if I lead you through the valley of shadows itself, you need not fear, for my rod and my staff will comfort you. Then he added, Thou shalt not be afraid for the terror by night, nor the arrow that flies by day, nor for the pestilence that walketh in darkness, nor for the destruction that wasteth at noonday. Though 1,000 may fall at thy side, and 10,000 at thy right hand, it shall not come nigh to thee. For I will cover thee with my feathers, and under my wings shalt thou rest. Psalm 91, 4-7. The gentleness of his voice, as he said these things, was indescribable. Then Much Afraid knelt at his feet, and built yet another altar, and said, Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Then, because she found that even as she spoke her teeth were chattering with fright, and her hands had gone clammy, she looked up into his face and added, For thou art not a man that thou should lie, nor the Son of Man that thou should repent. Hast thou said, and shall not do it? And hast thou spoke, and not make good on it? Then the shepherd smiled more comfortingly than ever before, laid both hands on her head, and said, Be strong. Yea, be strong, and fear not." Then he continued, "Much afraid. Don't ever allow yourself to begin trying to picture what it will be like. Believe me, when you get to the places which you dread, you will find that they are different as possible from what you have imagined. Just as was the case when you were actually ascending the precipice. I must warn you that I see your enemies lurking among the trees ahead, and if you ever let craven fear begin painting a picture on the screen of your imagination, you will walk with fear and trembling and agony where no fear is." When he said these things, he picked up another stone from the place where she was kneeling and gave it to her to put with other memorial stones. Then he went his way, and Much Afraid and her companion started on the path which led up through the forest. Almost as soon as they had reached the trees, they saw the face of mean, sickly self-pity looking out from behind one of the trunks. He gabbled ever so quickly before he dodged back into hiding. "I say, Much Afraid, this really is a bit too thick. I mean, whatever will he do next? Forcing a poor little lame, frightened creature like yourself to go through the dangers which only brave, strong men ought to be expected to face. Really, your shepherd is almost more of a bully than Craven Fear himself." Hardly had he stopped before Resentment put his head out and said crossly, "There's absolutely no reason for it either, because there's another perfectly good path that skirts the forest altogether and brings you right up to the snow line without going anywhere near these unnecessary dangers. Everybody else goes that way. Why shouldn't you? Tell him you won't go this way, Much Afraid, and insist on being taken the usual path. This way is for mortars only, and you, my dear, don't fit into that picture at all." Then Craven Fear leered at her for a moment and said contemptuously, "So, you think you're going to become a little heroine, don't you? And going to sing through the forest of danger? What will you bet, Much Afraid, that you won't end up shrieking and screaming like a maniac maimed for the rest of your life?" Bitterness was next to speak and sneered from behind another tree. "He would do this. It's just as I told you. After you have dutifully gone through one terrifying experience, he's always got something still worse ahead of you." Then Pride, who was still limping badly and seemed extra venomous as a result, said, "You know, he won't be able to rest content until he has put you to complete shame, because that's the way he produces that precious humility he's so crazy about. He'll humble you to dust, Much Afraid, and leave you groveling like an idiot in front of everyone." Much Afraid and her companions walked on without answering and without taking any notice. But as before, Much Afraid discovered that she limped more painfully whenever she heard what they said. It was really terribly perplexing to know what to do. If she listened, she limped, and if she put her fingers in her ears, she couldn't accept the hands of her two guides, which meant that she would stumble and slip. So they stopped for a moment or two and discussed what to do. And then Suffering opened a little first aid kit hanging at her girdle, took out some cotton, and firmly plugged the ears of Much Afraid. Although this was uncomfortable, it did seem to have the desired effect, at least temporarily, for when the 5 sulkers saw that they could not make her hear them, they soon tired of bawling at her and left her alone until another opportunity should occur for badgering her again. At first, the forest did not really seem too dreadful. Perhaps it was that up there on the mountains, the air was so fresh and strong that it made those who breathed it fresh and strong too. Also, the sun was still shining, and Much Afraid began to feel a sensation which was completely new to her, a thrill of excitement, and incredible as it seemed, of almost pleasurable adventure. Here she was, lame Much Afraid, actually walking through the forest of danger, and not really minding. This lasted for quite some time, until huge black clouds gradually rolled over the sky, and the sun went behind. In the distance, thunder rolled, and the woods became dark and very still. Suddenly, a bolt of lightning scorched across the sky, and somewhat ahead of them was a rending crash as a great forest tree fell to the earth. Then another, and another. Then the storm, in all its fury, was bursting around them, thunder rolling, lightning sizzling and crackling in every direction, until the whole forest seemed to be groaning and shaking and falling about them. The strangest thing was that though Much Afraid felt a shuddering thrill go through her at every crash, she was not really afraid. That is, she felt neither panic nor desire to run, nor even real dread, for she kept repeating to herself, "Though 1,000 shall fall at thy side, and 10,000 at thy right hand, it shall not come nigh to thee. For I will cover thee with my feathers, and under my wings shalt thou rest." So, throughout the whole storm, she was filled with a strange, wonderful peace, such as she had never known before, and walked between her two companions, saying to herself, "I shall not die, but live and declare the works of the Lord." At last the storm began to rumble off into the distance. The crashes died down, and there was a quiet lull. The three women stopped to wring the water out of their clothes and hair, and try to tidy themselves. As they did, Craven Fear appeared again, and yelled at the top of his voice, "I say, Much Afraid, the storm has only gone round the mountains for a short time. Already it's beginning to approach again, and will be worse than before. Make a bolt back down the path as quickly as you can, and get away from these dangerous trees before it starts again, or you'll be killed. There is just time for you to make a good escape." "Look here," exclaimed Much Afraid, most unexpectedly, water still dripping from her hair, and her sodden skirts clinging like wet rags around her legs. "I can't stand that fellow shouting at me any longer. Please help me, both of you." And setting the example, she stooped down, picked up a stone, and flung it at Craven Fear. Her two companions actually laughed for the very first time, and started hurling a barrage of stones among the trees where the five were lurking. In a moment or two, none of their enemies were visible. Then, just ahead of them, through the trees, they saw a log hut, which seemed to offer a promise of shelter and protection from the storm, which certainly was again drawing near. Hurrying towards the cabin, they found that it stood in a clearing well away from the trees, and when they tried the door latch, to their joy it opened and they thankfully slipped inside. With great presence of mind, Suffering immediately closed the door and bolted it behind them, and none too soon. The next minute their enemies were banging on the door, shouting, "Hey, open the door and let us in! The storm is starting again! You can't leave us out here!" Much Afraid went to the door and shouted through the keyhole the advice they had offered to her. "Make a bolt down the path as quickly as you can and get away from these dangerous trees, or you'll be killed. You have just time to make good your escape before the storm starts again." There was a sound of muttered curses outside, then of hurrying feet fading away into the distance, and it seemed as though this time the advice was being acted upon. Back rolled the storm, fiercer and more terrible than before, but they were safely sheltered in the hut out of range of crashing trees, and their shelter proved perfectly weatherproof, for not a drop came through the roof. They found in the room a supply of firewood stacked beside a small kitchen range, with a kettle and some saucepans. While Suffering busied herself lighting the fire, Sorrow held a kettle under the spout outside the window, and filled it with rainwater. Much Afraid went to a cupboard on the wall to see if it yielded any treasures. Sure enough, there was crockery on the shelves, and a supply of tinned foods, as well as a big tin of unleavened biscuits. So in a very little time, while the storm still furiously raged and rattled outside, there they were, sitting around a crackling fire, warming themselves and drying their sopping garments, while they drank comforting hot cocoa and satisfied their hunger. Though the uproar of the tempest without was almost deafening, the hut shuddered and shook in every blast, yet inside was nothing but peace and thanksgiving and cheerful contentment. Much Afraid found herself thinking with astonished awe that it was really the happiest and most peaceful experience during the whole of the journey, up till that time. As they lay down on the mattresses, which they discovered piled in another part of the hut, she repeated again, very softly to herself, "He has covered me with his feathers, and under his wings I do trust." The storm continued with great violence for 2 or 3 days, but while it lasted, the 3 travelers rested quietly in the shelter of the hut, going outside only during brief lulls to gather wood. This they dried in the oven to replenish the stock they were using, so that others following on behind might not be left without fuel. There seemed to be a good source of tinned foods and unleavened biscuits, and they supposed that some of the shepherd's servants must visit the hut from time to time with new supplies. During those quiet days, in the midst of raging tempest, Much Afraid came to know her two companions in a new way and almost to understand more of their mountain dialect which they spoke. In some strange way, she began to feel that they were becoming real friends, and not just attendants whom the shepherd had commanded to go with her as guides and helpers. She found, too, that now she was accepting their companionship in this way, she seemed more alive than ever to the beauty and delight in the world around her. It seemed as though her senses had been quickened in some extraordinary way, enabling her to enjoy every little detail of her life, so that although her companions actually were sorrow and suffering, she often felt an almost inexplicable joy and pleasure at the same time. This would happen when she looked at the bright, crackling flames in the log fire, or listened to the sound of lashing rain overhead, emphasizing the safety and peace within the hut, or when she saw through the window the tossing trees waving their arms against the background of scurrying clouds, or a lightning rent sky, or again, very early before daybreak, when she saw the morning stars shining serenely through a rift in the clouds, or heard the clear jubilant note of a bird during the lull of the storm. All of these things seemed to be speaking to her in mountain dialect, and to her growing astonishment she found it an incredible, beautiful language, so that sometimes her eyes filled with tears at the pure joy of her, and her heart seemed so full of ecstasy that she could hardly bear it. One morning, when the storm was rattling and raging through the forest louder than ever, she noticed Sorrow sitting by the fire singing quietly to herself. The words, of course, being in mountain dialect, which Much Afraid was learning to understand. This is the best translation that I can give, but you will realize that the original was much more beautiful and full of forest sounds and music. How lovely, how nimble are thy feet, O prince's daughter. They flash and sparkle and can run more fleet than running water. On all the mountains there is no gazelle, no roe or hind can overtake thee, nor can leap as well, but lag behind. Why, Sorrow, exclaimed Much Afraid, I didn't know you could sing, nor even that you knew any songs. Sorrow answered quietly, neither did I, but on the way up here through the forest I found the words and tune coming into my head, just as I am singing them now. I like it, said Much Afraid. Makes me think of the time when I shall have hinds feet myself, and so it is comforting, and the tune is so nice and springy. Go turn that down, please.
Okay.
It makes me want to jump. She laughed at the thought of her crooked feet being able to jump, then coaxed, Teach me the song, please do. So Sorrow sang it over several times until Much Afraid knew it perfectly well, and went about the hut humming it to herself, trying to picture what it would be like to be a gazelle leaping on the mountains and able to jump from crag to crag, just as the shepherd did. When the day came for her to receive her hinds feet, she would be able to follow him wherever he went. The picture was so lovely that she could hardly wait for it to come true. And that is the end of chapter 11. I like that one. I feel like I can identify a little bit. I've been at places where I've gotten to a place where I'm able to enjoy life more than I ever did before. Colors seem brighter, things smell better, flowers are more beautiful. It's just the freedom that comes in Jesus Christ. And though it doesn't mean that our trials or tribulations are over, or that our journey is over, I think as we draw closer to the Lord, we begin to see things through His eyes, and it really is the peace that surpasses all understanding. not that I definitely have not handled trials and tribulations perfectly or with all the grace and mercy and strength that I wish I could, but it's different. It's different than it used to be. And where I am more easily able to fight off my enemies, self-pity, fear, pride, and I liked that part, where she was just overtaken all of a sudden with this courage and starts hurling stones at them, to where they did flee, they ran from her because she took courage. Poor little Much Afraid was able to throw stones at Craven Fear himself, and pride and self-pity and resentment. And I really liked that because it was the strength of the Good Shepherd that she was drawing from. And I know a little more now than I ever have before of what it's like to be able to draw on the strength of the Lord and to fight for it, to continue on my journey and to fight for my freedom. And it's such a beautiful thing, and definitely only able to do any of these things through Jesus Christ, who gives me strength. So thank you for listening. Be back with us again, hopefully tomorrow with chapter 12. It hasn't been as easy for us to record every day like we were with the Proverbs, and I really hate that, and I want to remedy that and be able to stay on track. But we're not giving up, even though we've had a few bumps in the roads and our schedules have changed. We both kind of keep having unexpected things arise. And so we haven't been doing this every single day like we were with Proverbs, and I really don't like that because I want to be able to do this every single day, no matter what's going on in our personal lives. So we're working really hard at being able to strengthen ourselves to be able to do this faithfully. But I also am learning not to be so hard on myself that I just quit, because that's overcoming that perfection. Well, if I didn't finish it, or I didn't do it the way that I wanted, so I'll just quit and start over. And the Lord is teaching me how to just stay the course. Like the tortoise and the hare, the old story that we heard as kids, the tortoise and the hare. I'm not going to quit just because we might have a few bumps in the road, but we're going to keep going and see what God is doing in this and where He wants us to go. And so thank you for those of you that are still listening with us and being patient with us. And for anybody, in the future who might have stumbled upon this, thank you for listening. I hope that it's blessing your life. And we'll see you next time with chapter 12. Thanks. Bye.